Mr. Collingrott, thank you very much for your testimony and for your historical perspective as well. As you were speaking, it called to mind, and Dr. Lantos Sweat made this point about Natan Sharansky and his wife, who worked tirelessly for his release. Congressman Wolf, Chairman Wolf, and I were actually in Perm Camp 35, the infamous prison where Sharansky had been incarcerated, just a few months after he was released. Obviously, many other political prisoners were still there. But the lessons learned from the way we handled human rights with the Soviet Union was that you integrate them, you never stovepipe them. We risked superpower confrontation with a country that was bristling with nuclear weapons aimed at the United States because we put human rights and the value of human life at such a high level that, I mean, when Secretary Shultz would visit Moscow, my first trip to the Soviet Union was in '82 on behalf of Soviet Jewish refuseniks. He would always meet with all the dissidents and then meet with the Soviets as well. There was never this stovepiping, this separation, this doing something in another room. And I think your reminder of that, Mr. Collingrott, couldn't come at a more, and you did it as well, Mr. Sekulow. You all did, frankly, because I am very concerned, especially in response to the question I asked of the Secretary just 2 days ago, and then the different versions that we've gotten from other people within the administration. Was it discussed or not? And it would look, or it would seem, if it was discussed at all, it was on the margins, and it should have been center stage. Every conversation that we had with the Iranians should have begun with Saeed Abedini and ended with Saeed Abedini. How can we trust the Iranians' signature on a piece of paper if they so callously mistreat not only their own human rights defenders, but if they take pastors like Saeed Abedini, an American, not only incarcerate him, but as you pointed out, Mr. Sekulow, at the very time when these negotiations are happening, transfer him from one terrible prison to an infamous prison where he is even at greater risk. That was a message sender that seemed to have been missed by the U.S. Department of State and by the administration. And I would agree with all of you who made it very clear there's no partisanship here. I can tell you, having been here 33 years, when we unite on human rights in Congress, no matter who's in the White House, it's all about standing up for the victims and others, their families, like Mrs. Abedini, and making sure that we speak out very loudly and very clearly. But we are not in those negotiations face-to-face with, in this case, the Iranians. So, again, I think your message here today that this has to be integrated, mainstreamed, and not stovepiped is very clear, because I too, like others on this panel, think about and pray about Pastor Abedini every single day. So thank you for reminding us just how important this is. So the integration issue is very important. If I could ask very quickly, Dr. Lantos Sweat, you've asked as a commission that under Section 105 of the Comprehensive Iran Sanctions and Disinvestment Act, that certain Iranian officials be censored because of their mistreatment based on religious persecution. And if I could also just, when you said, Mr. Sekulow, that Pastor Saeed has exhausted all legal remedies, who now makes the decision? It really does come down to a negotiation with the United States, doesn't it? They have to know that the value is sufficiently high that the relationship with Iran hinges, the tipping point is how well or how poorly going forward they will treat Pastor Abedini. And finally, your statement, Mrs. Abedini, was very bold when you called on the President to re-engage, when you called on the Secretary of State to re-engage, and when you said, please don't let this case be discussed on the margins, and please make his case a priority. There will be more negotiations, and I think the sooner that re-engagement occurs, the better, if you would want to elaborate on that as well. Dr. Sweat?
Well, we think that the application of sanctions directed at specific people implicated in human rights and religious freedom abuses is incredibly important. It's part of the long tradition, successful tradition of the human rights movement in general to name and shame and blame, to identify, to pin responsibility on those responsible. And so it really is critically important. And the fact is, there's been a lot of discussion about President Rouhani's charm offensive. But when we look at what is actually going on in Iran under his leadership, it's actually more offensive than it is charming, particularly, again, as it relates to religious freedom violations. And so we feel very, very strongly that that step of our government officially saying, you are not welcome here. If you have assets here, they will be frozen. They will be, put beyond your reach. Those sorts of concrete steps send that message that you're not a political leader, engaging in respectful and appropriate sort of leadership in your country. You are someone who is personally implicated in vile abuses of the human rights of your citizens. We know it, we're saying it, and by doing so, the rest of the world knows it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my statement, when I discussed that Said cannot be left in the margins, I believe that if we do not speak out, if we do not put him at the center stage, then we're not only sending the world a wrong message about where we stand in terms of human rights issues. We're sending Iran, but especially with the Middle East, with the high increase of persecution on the Christians and religious minorities. I believe by putting Said as just not a person, it's where we stand and where we put our value in terms of human rights issues, and I think it's very dangerous. Americans are watching our government to see what we will do, and the world's watching to see where we stand in terms of important human rights issues such as religious freedom, which has been a important value since this country was founded. So I believe that leaving it at the margins is very dangerous and is sending a very dangerous message to the world.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would assert again, as my opening statement, the ineptness of the State Department's relationship with Mrs. Abedini. She is represented not just by us, but ultimately by the U.S. government, who is sitting at that table. And I will tell you that in conversations with them, that they ask us to keep confidential, and they ask us to, what updates they're doing around the world. And for instance, I will point out something that was news to us. I don't know if Secretary Kerry misspoke when he mentioned the Swedish, but they had never been mentioned to us on any phone calls. And there are countries that have. That is not one of them. He may have misspoke, but that would be something to clear up. We have also been told on those phone calls. Now, this is by lower-level staff, mostly in NEA, so the Near East Affairs Department of the State, that it was absolutely being brought up on the margins. So why would Secretary Kerry have been so broad in that statement that it was not? And then third and finally, the idea that bringing them up would make them hostages or pawns, I would beg to differ and state that Mr. Abedini, as well as Mr. Hekmati and Mr. Levinson, already are pawns, and they already are hostages of Iran. They are American citizens being held by a foreign government. We're sitting at the table with them. Some have been hostages for nearly 7 years, 2 years, or 444 days. They're already at that point. Thank you.
I would just conclude before yielding to Mr. Deutsch that 2 days ago, on December 10th, we, along with Chairwoman Ileana Ross-Layton, chaired a hearing on Coptic Christians. For me, it was my 4th hearing in 2 years on Coptic Christians. And many of us fought very hard to get language into the Foreign Office Appropriations Bill that conditioned United States aid. It's properly conditioned on the Egyptian-Israeli peace agreement, the Camp David. But we said religious freedom also, there ought to be conditionality there as well. We got into the Foreign Ops bill. Mrs. Clinton waived it. As the Coptic Christians were being slaughtered, churches decimated, monasteries, many of them hundreds of years old, we looked askance and embraced Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood. It was appalling. And one of the issues that I raised repeatedly, again, I think what Mrs. Abedini is doing, you know, one of the side issues that will help all others is pointing out a huge deficiency. Many Coptic Christian girls had been abducted, forced into Islamic marriages. We had a woman who actually did the reporting on it. She's a noted human rights investigator, bring this information forward, and the administration did nothing on it. And that is very disturbing. So there's a larger backdrop issue of a disregard for religious freedom issues that has to change, and it has to start with Pastor Abedini. Mr. Deutsch.